So we've all just heard three very different worldviews, and this session is all about personal health. So what I'd like to do to help the audience put into perspective the different views you've all brought to this stage is to pose a patient, if you don't mind, a healthy patient, maybe somebody who's sitting in this audience. So let's say there's someone here who's a 35-year-old male, and life is filled with work. They've come to the Dreamforce to learn more about the cloud, how to think about their customers. They're going to race to the airport. Their to-do list just got longer because they've been in San Francisco. Family's at home. Things are chaotic. And it's getting to be the end of the year, so they're starting to think New Year's resolutions. This 35-year-old is healthy, but there's so many choices. You talked about Fitbit, we heard about yoga, meditation, running, calorie expenditure. If you were to turn to that 35-year-old in this audience, in this session on personal health, two questions I want to pose to you. What's the single most important action you believe that individual can take? And secondly, because you all come at this so differently, what's your proof of that? Why do you believe that? Is that a spiritual belief? Is it data-driven? One of the things I want to push you each a little bit on, why are we hearing three such different points of view? I mean, related, but very different in terms of life is about choices. So when they wake up, what do they choose to add or subtract from their life? And remember the theme, personal health, as you define it. David, why don't you start?
So the first thing and most important thing to me is know yourself. And so that can be taking metrics such as your blood pressure. One of the most common mistakes doctors make is they see a patient at 1 o'clock, they take their blood pressure, they put them on a pill. So what was it in the morning when you go up, at night when you go to bed? Look in the mirror at your body shape. Look how your weight is changing, how your stress is changing, how your sleep is changing. You know yourself, you're going to see changes better. And that also includes knowing about your family. Family history is one of the most important keys, and that's been shown study over and over to actually predict some things that may happen. And when it does, you can develop a personalized plan for yourself.
So your most important advice would be know yourself, measure yourself.
Know yourself. Most of the studies on prevention with medications start at age 40. So you picked an age of 35, where at that age, we don't know that anything helps per se, but knowing yourself does.
Deepak?
I would say know yourself and also love yourself. In fact, before you make a choice for anything, whether it's that French fries or hamburger or going to the gym, ask yourself, if I really love myself, what's the choice I would make? That would immediately break the cycle of conditioned behavior, which is, as you know, a triggered response from the lower brain. And so that moment of interruption, stop, take a few deep breaths, observe your body, and then proceed with awareness. But I go along with everything he's saying, obviously, because you need that data also. Unfortunately, now we have the technology, the digital technology to begin to gather that data.
We agree.
So you agree on the measurement piece. Say more about love yourself. What does that mean? What's I'm a very goal-oriented person. What's the action item if you're telling people to love themselves?
What does a mother do? Does she ask, what's the action step if I love my baby? I mean, that would be sad if she had to ask that question. Okay? So just treat yourself with the same caring, tenderness, affection, and attention that you would your own baby.
That's beautifully said. Wayne?
I would echo what these two prominent physicians say, obviously. But I'd also have become aware of every thought that you have. We become what we think about. We become what we think about all day long. I was on a panel, honored to be on a panel in 1978 with the great Viktor Frankl in Vienna. And he said that the people who survived were the people who changed. He said, when we're confronted in life with situations over which we have no control, we are challenged to change ourselves. He said, I had to be able to find joy and beauty in a floating fish head, which was my protein for the day, in a bowl of dirty water. To be able to challenge ourselves to change the way we look at things. I've said it many times in my talks, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And that's not just a clever play on words, that's a quantum truth, as Deepak so eloquently spoke about. You know, we look at something and the observer changes what they observe. The second thing I would say is just something that I have done in my own life, which is to look at the kind of food that we're putting into our body. I was blessed to meet a man who wrote a book called Wheat Belly, Bill Davis, a medical doctor. And I decided to take gluten out of my body beginning on the summer solstice this year. And it changed so many things within me, physical things, but also emotional things as well, because I think what has happened is our food supply is becoming contaminated by genetically modified means that is really altering what it is that we're eating. And we need to become much, much, much more conscious that the amber waves of grain that was wheat when we were children is no longer the way wheat is. Wheat is now, and Deepak talked about how we shared the same genes with bananas, we shared the same genes with wheat. Yet the wheat that we're eating, that we call wheat, has been modified to create its own pesticides, to not be able to reproduce its next generation. I mean, the cycle of life, it seems to me, is this generation seed produces the next generation, and the next, whether that's in animals, that's in vegetables, it's in humans. And now you have to go buy those seeds because they've been patented and genetically modified. I think we need to become really, really conscious of what we're putting into our body and making sure that if you want to eat genetically modified food, we haven't even tested what this has, the long-term effects of this on people. I think it's alarming what's happening to our food supply.
So let me ask you, because I think you raise a question about gluten in the diet or wheat in the diet. And again, I want to come at the thinking about our audience today. So each of them is going to leave the session hopefully with some pearls. And so I wanted to ask, and any of you can go first, but the question is not advice, because we've been hearing a lot of advice in this session, but each of you has a loud megaphone. You're writers, you're speakers, you go on programs, whether it's PBS or CBS, you go on stages globally where people are taking in what you say and then taking action based on that. How do you decide for yourself? So now your name means something. You put your good name behind statements you make and claims that you make or suggestions you have for others, advice. How do you put a hurdle rate? I'm a trained scientist and physician, and I challenge students who I interact with. So what are the data? What's your proof? Is this a hypothesis or is this a proven fact? How do each of you decide when you communicate with the public whether you're saying to someone, well, this is interesting, I'll look into that or I'll think about that, versus I now believe this, so not only am I going to change my diet in this way or that way, but I believe you should. How do you think about data, facts, and proof? And there's been a lot of talk about spirituality and God in this session. How do you separate that sort of randomized controlled trial way of thinking about proof from the spiritual, the belief, the history? My sense from this session is each of you come at that slightly differently. Can you help us understand how you think of proof and advice?
We are a complex emergent system, and so it is almost impossible to predict making a change, whether it be your diet or your health lifestyle, what you do, what the outcome is going to be. So I really believe that we have to look at long-term studies with endpoints and metrics that matter. The goal is not to lower your LDL. The goal is to prevent heart disease. The goal is not to make you more muscular, make you live longer and better. So you have to know your metrics. Certainly things like taking out gluten for the diet, for some people has a benefit. We know the molecular determinants of that. We can predict who will have a reaction to it, but there isn't data in that small outside of that small subset of people who have that molecular test that a gluten-free diet actually benefits. That's not to say it won't help the individual, but in the mass people it won't. So we have to be very cautious what we recommend. Genetically modified food, you're right, it's been optimized about calories per acre. And people forgot about health and all those good things they put in the genes to use their insecticide. It got corrupted in a sense. But we've been doing genetically modified food since Mendel, right? He genetically modified, peas in experiments. Same thing, less technology. But we have no choice but to use genetically modified food going forward because of global climate change. You can't move the wheat fields of Nebraska. You can't move the wheat fields of Nebraska to New York City. It's not going to work. We have to use science to do it ethically and right, and we have to take it away from companies and move it to whether it be academics or nonprofits to do it right. We have to use technology to make food better. We have to do this with what's happening in the world. And you can argue all you want, but look at the data.
So I'll let people who agree with you, since people who disagree with you are also speaking up. So David, who do you believe? You talked before about the absence of a leader in health and science. People use the internet a lot for such advice. They read your books, they watch you on TV or your videos. Who is a trusted source for you?
But to me, it's peer-reviewed medical journals where I can look at the data and say, who does it apply to? How well was it done? And what were the real outcomes? And so to me, that's the only way we can actually do things. We need better leadership to stand up and say what they are, to interpret them for people. The problem is most of the media today reports things and reports the headlines. They take the press releases, they copy and paste it and put it out there. And we need real interpretation, and we don't have that. So I get up now at 3 or 4 a.m. to do the morning show in New York because I need to. I feel obligated to educate. It's part of my responsibility as a physician and a healer to educate people.
Deepak, can you help also, in addition to my question about proof, how do you think about spirituality, reincarnation, some of the tenets you talked about? And for those of us who are used to the experimental system, how do you put that into perspective in terms of your level of proof needed for you to give out advice or believe something?
First of all, I agree with almost everything that David said, but I will say almost, because to get to these studies takes decades. I was talking about mind-body medicine 30 years ago. Now we have the studies. Okay, now we have sciences, immunomodulation, psychoneuroendocrinology, digital medicine to actually measure. In the meanwhile, it's not easy to get peer-reviewed journals, your publications published, even with the data, because, David, you know that the peer review is another system, right? I have for years tried to get stuff that I thought had good data published. Only now I'm getting some response because there's a grassroots movement. I would, in the meanwhile, I would be hesitant to tell people don't use genetically modified food, but as he said, it does destroy the ecosystem. We have data on that. And there's common sense also. If something is called an insecticide or a pesticide, there's a reason for that name. It kills an insect which shares the same genetic material that you have. It's petroleum product in your food. So I would use common sense till the data is in. I would tell a person, do your own research, and then use common sense and wait for the studies. But the studies may take a long time. It took a long time for studies to come for even smoking. And I remember when I was an intern, there was doctors smoking Lucky cigarettes and the advertisements were in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Right. So, I think we have to look for the studies and also use a little common sense.
So you talk about the, well, I'm for common sense too.
Oh, God.
Well, two things. Please come back to the question I asked about spirituality, but also, can you help us understand what your trusted sources are?
My trusted sources these days, I go to the National Library of Medicine. I also Google information, and I call friends like David, tell me about Avastin in this particular case of choriocarcinoma or neuroblastoma or whatever. So those are my sources. I call academics, I do my own research on the internet, and I look at published papers.
So spirituality. How do you think about spirituality in that realm of what do you believe?
Okay, so and I'm glad you asked the question, okay? Because there's more conflict in the world right now around the word God. So I'm not talking about that. In the tradition where I come from, spirituality can be summed up in one word: self-awareness. That's it. And we were taught, even growing up, that the highest form of human intelligence is the ability to observe yourself without judging yourself. And when you do observe that, you make conscious choices. When you practice a mental technique like meditation, and incidentally, we have right now, thanks to technology, we have 700,000 people globally coming online to meditate with us, with me and Oprah Winfrey right now. And this is the largest meditation experiment in the history of civilization. And we have scripts monitoring our people through digital technology. So I would say, don't even introduce any belief system. Start to observe yourself, make peace and equanimity and joy and love and compassion and empathy your priorities, and then see how that affects your state of physical well-being. It's being done already.
Great, thank you. Wayne, how do you think about proof and spirituality?
I think very, very strongly and urgently about it. I think it's I don't read the studies. I'm not a scientist. I go by how I feel and what I know. I know that the food industry and big pharma, the pharmacy industry, has more lobbyists in Washington than there are congressmen for attempting to keep, I think, the food supply healthy, the drug supply healthy. It doesn't seem to me that it's that big a stretch to recognize that when you talk about obesity and these kinds of problems, as this grows and grows and grows, and diabetes continues to increase and increase, more drugs are going to be required and more and so on, that there's a big money factor involved in all of this. And to me personally, it just doesn't make any sense to allow companies. You talked about not being able to patent genes. That seems absurd that we can actually patent our own genes, but people are going out there and doing it and getting it approved, patenting seeds and foods and so on. I live on an island, I live on Maui, where 99% of the bananas and the papayas are genetically modified. You open them up, you look for seeds, there's no seeds in there because we used to take papayas, open up the seeds, or watermelons and plant them in the ground, and we'd get the next generation. Now you got to go to Monsanto or somebody else to buy that. That just seems to me insane and crazy, and that's my statistical analysis of it, and that we ought to be careful about it. And I don't say that for applause. I say that because since I took, I was up in Canada, I was in Halifax, I was giving a talk, and I saw two people there, Anne and Paul, who I hadn't seen in 2 years. And I looked at them, and they looked fantastic. They looked so healthy, so strong. They looked younger. This guy had lost his belly. She looked great. Her skin they were glowing. And I asked them what they did, and they said they changed their diet. They decided to eat, a word you said, David, real food. Real food, and they took gluten out of which is in about 80% of the food that we eat out there now, and it's not the food that we used to eat when we were young people. I said, okay, I'm going to give that a try. I gave it a try. My skin felt a whole lot better. I lost about 18 pounds. I stopped being bloated. I had a fungus thing on one of my toes that I'd had for 25 years that has, in 6 months, now disappeared. That's my research. That's my statistic. I feel better and look better and act better. And that's how I look at it. And I admire both of these men. Deepak and I have been very, very close friends for 25 years, like brothers. So we've traveled the world together, been on many, many stages together. And much of the spirituality that I know about and write about and speak about came because of the endless conversations that we had back in the 90s. And I love you and appreciate you for that.
So it sounds like you're using a combination of your own life experience, your incredible observational powers,
Right.
and common sense, as
Exactly.
Deepak puts it. Has it been your experience that has let you down in the past ever? How do you think about if new data or new things come about, given the number of books you've written and how long you've been at this, how do you course correct or adjust?
I course correct and adjust all along. I mean, I used to drink diet soda, like 6 or 7 of them a day. And my wife said to me, "You smell like a diet soda when you walk in the room." She said, "Why don't you give that shit up, Sergeant?" But that's the way she put it. She hardly ever says words like that. And I said, "Okay, I'll give it up." I changed it. I smoked cigarettes. You probably did too I think we talked about that when you were, and my course correction was, this is just not a healthy thing to do.
Right.
Breathing in noxious fumes just didn't make any sense to me. I started looking at the concept of fear and looking at some of the films that are out there on animals that are being let in and being led into rooms where the pheromones of fear are still left over from the animals that were just being slaughtered, just a few hours before, and the animals react. And so I thought, well, when I eat meat that has been slaughtered, I'm eating the fear. So I stopped eating slaughtered meat and things like that. I don't know.
Your observation and your own experience.
And I feel better, and I'm 73, and I'm the weight I was when I graduated from high school, and I feel good, and I've had major healings take place. And speaking of spirituality, I had an incredible experience, a healing experience from leukemia with John of God down in Brazil, which was an amazing thing that you've probably read about or heard because they did a big story on it on Oprah Winfrey and so on. I don't know, it's like, was it Talopa? I think it was Talopa you used to quote and say, "Have a mind that's open to everything and attached to nothing." I'm open to it all. I heard you say something about vitamins today when I was sitting there, and I thought, I think I take too many vitamins. I think I've been doing that. I'm going to really look hard at how much of that stuff that I'm putting in, do I really need that?
Yeah.
I will change as a result of your talk today. So that's what I do.
So you're open and taking it all in. That's
Everything.
terrific. Now, David, let me go back to you about this course correction. So my own perception is that the traditional scientific method is often challenged because when it's wrong, and we've been telling everybody, get a PSA test for prostate cancer, or here's how mammograms fit in, that the public then is disappointed. How do you think about the traditional scientific method and changing our minds or course correction as a clinician and a cancer doctor?
I think there are very few things that are black and white in science. And I think most decisions in healthcare are based on your own value system. So I can't tell you whether to get a PSA test or a mammogram. What I can tell you is the data on both sides and make the right decision for your value system. So any doctor who says, this is what you need to do, they're by definition wrong, because we have very few right and wrongs. So the PSA testing is a great example, right? It clearly saves lives. Countries that screen have half the death rate of countries that don't. The other side is we dramatically overtreat this disease. So in the right setting, with the right value system, it makes total sense. And that requires something called a discussion. Medicine is not incentivized to actually spend time and discuss things. And so it really requires the empowered patient to come in with some data and to sit there with the questions and the doctor to discuss them.
Deepak?
I think
No.
even the data is sometimes not offered because of so many forces that influence the market. How many people here know, for example, that only 2% of people live longer if they have stable angina and they get a bypass or an angioplasty. Not talking about unstable angina, but a stable angina, 2%. Yet we have $300 billion of surgery being done for stable angina in the country. So I think it behooves us as doctors to share that data, and it behooves the medical industrial complex to be aware of that. It behooves people to be aware of that. There are, I'm not saying don't get bypass surgery. If you have unstable angina, you rush to the hospital and get it. But look at the data as well, because not all of it is obvious.
Wayne?
Well, we were on stage together, Deepak, in London, probably 20, 25 years ago, Palladium, and we talked about cancer. And I asked you that question about why so much cancer. There are more people making a living off of cancer than have cancer. And then I meet Anita Moorjani, who I spoke about briefly, and she makes a connection between fear and cancer. And fear isn't just something like I'm afraid to die, or I'm afraid I'm going to get it worse, or I'm afraid that my body, it's the endless little things of I'm afraid I won't be approved of. But I often ask, why do you drive the speed limit? Do you drive the speed limit because it's the safe thing to do and because you love your fellow man and you don't want to endanger anybody? Or do you drive the speed limit because you're afraid that if you don't, you're going to get a ticket? You multiply that by hundreds and thousands of daily ways of looking at life from a fearful place rather than from a place of love. I mean, Anita came back and said, the only thing that I learned from my near-death experience was that we need to treasure our magnificence. Just treasure how magnificent we are, and we don't have to please anyone. We don't have to fulfill anybody else's idea of what we should be. And that is one of the healthiest things that we can do. You remember that conversation?
I do, but I also, David would tell you that cancer is not one disease, it's hundreds of diseases. It's so complicated that it's not easy to make that kind of statement for everyone. It doesn't apply, although fear does create a biology that's not helpful, for sure.
Right.
Can I ask you both about this? Because I know you've written about cancer and fear and people.
I haven't.
I think you have, Wayne.
Yes.
The one, as an oncologist myself, one worry I have is that the powerful positive stories of someone having that kind of attitude and doing well with cancer can quickly shift to blaming people or people feeling badly if they're cancer and they are doing poorly, if they're suffering, if they're dying. How do you put that into perspective so that the individual who's struggling with cancer doesn't feel judged? Because if only they had the right attitude, they'd do better. How do you think about that?
Can I address that? Because at our center, we have oncologists. We work with oncologists at the University Hospital, but we also have physicians who address these issues. And that's why we need an integrative approach, because if you just dismiss that, then you're going to cause a lot of resentment. And there may be some truth to some of that as well.
Right.
It's so complex. But if you have doctors who listen to stories, patients come with stories, and we don't listen to stories. We just want to know the symptom and write a prescription. And yet the body, in many cases, is a metaphor for the story, the divorce they're having, the child who's in rehab, etc., is causing physiological havoc in their lives. And you have to address that while you address the things that...
Right.
That's why, I call you. Haven't I called you in cases where I needed help? Because we need that integration.
So you need all of it, the holistic approach.
Yeah, it's never, to me, it's not about blame. It's just whatever it is,
Let's participate together.
Whatever condition you have going on in your body, whatever it may be, it's not punishment, it's not blame, it's not because you've been bad, but it's yours. You own it. And if you're aligned with it and you say, I'm going to take responsibility for healing it. I'm not going to, just rely upon studies or anything else. It's mine. I aligned with it in some way. And because I've aligned with it, now I'm going to disalign with it, or no longer be aligned with it. That's all. It's not about saying, oh, I'm now being punished because I thought bad thoughts my whole life. It's really more about, it's mine, I own it. You do it with a cold, you do it with arthritis, you do it with a stubbed toe, whatever it is.
Right.
You just say, I created this, it's within me, and if I take responsibility for it, then I have some chance of maybe doing something about it.
Terrific. So please join me in thanking our three speakers now this afternoon. Thank you. Thank you, Wayne. Thank you, Deepak. Thank you, David.